Executive Committee of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me with. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 3 on the agenda, public comment. No one's approached me or the clerk, and so we'll move on to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the October 12th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the October 12th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, policy issue and potential committee determination. Item 6, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, and/or policy. Under item A, 6A, discussion and possible action by executive committee. Review the budget process. What we're doing in rules review is we're trying to put into our rules the updated budget process that we implemented for the 2024 budget process that took place, interacting with the committees and having discussions with the committees earlier, providing that education. So I think what I'm looking here for, or looking for guidance from the committee chairs, is there anything that we could do that would be helpful for your committees in engaging in the budget process itself? I think the process as a general rule was much more well received. We had much better interaction with each of the committees. We had guidance provided by the committees, and obviously a much better product when it was all done and said. I think the budget, an hour and a half versus 5.5, was much more receptive to everyone. So again, looking for input, as is the chair of the HR Finance Committee, but more specifically chairs of Rules Review, if there's something that each or anybody can think of that would be of help in the budget process. Understanding that there is limits, and as far as timing, some of the information, a prime example was the highway aid that we get from the state. After we adopted the budget or received the budget from the administrator, the very next day, we get a change in the numbers. So there are limits to how soon that information is available, but that withstanding, is there anything else that anybody has as far as recommendations? John, if you had anything to add? Go ahead, please.
I think we're looking for, well, first of all, I think that what ERC did sort of was the benchmark on how we might want to approach it in the future, and from the perspective that all of the departments that had a reporting relationship to ERC really went out of their way to develop background information and other things. And it would be nice if we could look at that as sort of the benchmark, if we could, going forward for committees in terms of the breakdown of programmatic cost and other things. But I think we really are looking for how can we improve upon the process, and we try to get the committees involved in multiple ways relative to fee review and trying to determination of what our priority programs and other things. And I think the longer we do this, the better we'll get. But we're really looking for input.
Administrator Leonard, anything to add? from your standpoint?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you guys have characterized it well. My sense is a lot of the things we did, in fact, I think all of the things we did were improvements over our past process. So how can we continue to build on that? I did have 2 notes from previous discussions in committees. One relates to including fund balance information into the budget document, along with, for lack of a better term, kind of a glossary relative to the policies that underlie each of those fund balances. So working on getting that information together in our new system should certainly help with that. The other piece was really working to get something in place that hasn't been done for, as far as I can go back, that hasn't had board involvement, but I think it really would be good to have, and that is a 5-year CIP. To your point, Mr. Chair, just about timing, the same logic applies to the 5-year CIP. It's really a plan that is most certainly going to change. I mean, it's our best estimate of what those 5-year projects look like, but I think having a 5-year CIP that the board can lay eyes on in a more intentional way than we've ever done in the past, I think would be good. So those were 2 things, the fund balances and that 5-year CIP that I've heard in the past.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other committee members? Thoughts? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the requests that I had that went through infrastructure in this last meeting is not just fund balance, but actual expenses versus budgeted, actual. So whether that's done quarterly or monthly, but certainly within the budget process, I think it's important for us board members to understand where we are relative to what's budgeted. I know we have the document, within your budget, we talk about expenses and you compare previous years per department, but what is not in there is relative to what the budget was. So are we 95% to budget last year? And because then that money becomes part of the fund balance. So that would be something I think is very important for us to see.
I think there's a uniform request for that information. HR Finance has been requesting it. I think one of the challenges, and through no fault, when we started implementing the new ERP system and rolling over those chart of accounts that we had from the old system to the new system, the carryovers didn't have. Now, that's totally different than budget versus actual, no question, a comparison. However, that was also part of the implementation that we are hopeful. And I think HR Finance is very close on getting those numbers available and those reports available very soon. Administrator Leonard, have you got a...
Yeah, I can give a little bit of an update. I think it certainly relates to the budget process, but to Supervisor Dickinson's requested infrastructure, following that, we did sit down, and our plan is to have in March, we should have the year-end balances, and that should allow us to really provide that information in March. Then moving into the quarterly, we kind of agreed on the suggestion of quarterly budget to actual with a percentage denotation for departments relative to expenditures. Doing that quarterly would put us in May to allow us, because the committee meetings are early in the month, so you need a little bit of time, but I think that's certainly quite honestly, that's my goal, and I'm going to strive to hit that with finance. But that should hopefully then inform the overall budget process, as Supervisor Dickinson alluded to, so that we have more touch points through the year than it is when you just get the budget document with budget and actual expenditures, and then having a column that puts things in context as to kind of how those expenditures, what that percentage is.
The other question becomes if there's any when you start to look at budget to actual, it's okay. The challenge, one of the challenges that I've always seen with budget to actual is if you have some outliers where you have major expenses that may come in once a year at the end of the year or in the front of the year. So that may throw off, so that you don't have, unless you are budgeting and accruing under the accrual method, you won't have 1/12 of, for example, an insurance cost for an entity. But if there's any way to annotate that we have, a significant dollar expense that comes only annually, and we're only accounting for it annually, I think that it will be helpful for each of the committees in their various roles.
I think that's a good observation. Let's not let perfection be the enemy of better. I think at least if we get the percentages, we'll be able to have a conversation and say that perhaps, hey, we're only 50% through the year and we have expended 75% of our budget. That is because of X. I think we can at least have that conversation. But again, our goal is to have that in May for each of those committees.
Okay. Other suggestions or other recommendations on the budget process? Okay, then we'll move on to the next item, and that's the discussion about the fund balances. I'll turn it over to the Chair of HR Finance, Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was considerable discussion at the over the budget relative to the use of the social improvement fund balance in context of the potentially applying it toward the budget. And I think it raised a number of questions relative to our overall fund balance policy. And we have a policy where fund balances for certain accounts are clearly rolled over into the capital improvement program, and others it's not as clear. So the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee will be undertaking an evaluation of the fund balances and looking at what's the basis for the fund balance, what are the requirements, how does the money get there, how does it, where does it go, what sort of controls do we have, are there limitations on it, restricted versus unrestricted. I think one of the things we're looking for today is to determine what committees would like to be involved in the discussion and whether that involvement relates to a certain fund balance. For instance, infrastructure, I would think, would want to be looking at the highway reserves. I think that the Health and Human Services would want to look at the Social Improvement Fund, and there are other funds that fall within the solid waste program that may run through ERC. But we'd like to know what committees would be interested in what fund balances, and if they could let us know, we would look to coordinate a discussion and make sure that there's appropriate committee involvement in the development of that policy. At the end of the day, the intent is to develop a matrix or some sort of report that would be available to the county board members to understand what the purpose of the fund balance is, what the restrictions are. We had a discussion yesterday on the employee resources fund balance. Much of that is for insurance reserves and or health insurance, and we're trying to move toward self-insurance, and we need to maintain or grow that balance if we're going to entertain that. So that's not something that's necessarily understood by all members of the county board, and it's not necessarily articulated clearly anywhere. We'd like to have that in one place.
So again, what we're looking for, if you think that your committee has an interest in any of the fund balances, and again, I think Chairman mentioned it well. Infrastructure, probably the Highway Reserve Fund, and so Vice Chair McKeon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess when we talk about the fund balance, 10 years ago, is there any requirements per committee or state statute that requires a certain entity such as the infrastructure highway? I mean, we're looking at $50 million to build a new highway department. We have funds in that fund balance. Is that the purpose of that, or what? I guess we never really got into fund balances before, and like I said, I just wonder if there's any restrictions, requirements. How do we get to that point? Would help the committees understand.
Supervisor Robinson?
Again, that's our goal, is to spell out what the purpose is, where that authority comes from, whether it's policy, ordinance, statutes, et cetera, what are the limitations, and then we can set our own policies and guidelines that may drive it going forward. But I think that there's a need for clarity so that we all understand if we're trying to grow a fund balance for the purposes of building a building, it's different. You have a goal, it would be important to have that articulated and clearly understood. But that's one of the things we're relying on Christy to give us some of that background. We'll be working with Mike and the administrator relative to the development of that, and we just want to make sure that we engage the appropriate committees in that process. So I'm assuming from that you would be interested in infrastructure being involved in that highway reserve discussion.
And I think the clear intent is to determine is the fund balance spelled out by authorized by state statute or restricted by state statute? Is there what are or is it policy that's been developed by the board that's in that so understanding how they became and what kind of restrictions they have, if any. I think a total understanding of is there opportunities to review each of those policies and update them, because obviously there's need to maintain a certain amount of reserve for a bond rating and other items that the county has, and so and there's just a review of all of the policies and all of the rationale. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3. Supervisor Dickinson, please. Yep.
Yeah, well, the only thing I was going to mention is I know some, like school districts, for example, have policies about a certain percentage of a fund balance, whether it be per a department or per their department budget or the whole full county budget or school budget or whatever. So that would be something I think would be important to consider as well, because then the board could pass some sort of resolution and make it then clear, or pass the policy clear, and then have it established and then documented.
Absolutely. Supervisor Robinson?
You would be looking at the working reserve, sort of the reserve policy and what we would need for that working capital fund. Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussions? Okay. We'll move on then to item number 3, consideration of a participating in the Local Government Leadership Academy. This item was put on the agenda because we had have opportunities for multiple different educations and leadership. We have the NACO Leadership Academy that is offered through NACO, and then also we have a Leadership Academy that's offered through the local chamber. And so it's geared towards, I don't know that the NACO one is geared exclusively towards elected officials, but the local the chamber leadership program is probably geared a little more towards the elected officials. But so the question becomes: do we want to set aside some dollars to allow for board members to participate? So I'd throw it out, Administrator Leonard.
I was just going to clarify so the local one is the Local Government Leadership Academy. There is a link, I believe, in the packet.
Okay.
It's actually through the UW Extension Division of the Local Government Center. But it is a bit time limited. The deadline for application is the end of this year, so December 31st. The cost of that is $1,200, but it did come through the WCA communications, the frequent communications that they offer. So I think that prompted the inquiry from the chair. But if there is a desire, I can sit down and work with Kim on evaluating what's left in the county board budget and potential funding source. But we did have a number of years ago, there was one member of the county board that did go through that program. We had one staff person that went through it, is my understanding as well. This was before I took the position as administrator, but the feedback I inquired of that person what they thought. They thought it was, to the chair's point, more geared toward elected officials than necessarily county staff, but that still it was valuable. So wanted to bring that to the board. But if there is an interest, Kim and I can work to figure out a potential funding stream. But the timeline to register is quickly approaching.
And I think those of us that have attended the WCA annual conference, the graduates of that are recognized at the WCA annual conference. So if there's interest, or you know somebody that has interest on the board, we can, again, try to coordinate the available resources through the clerk's office. And then also the NACO Academy. That one is, I'm not sure if the other one, does that have some participation where there's actual in-person?
No, the NACO program is entirely virtual.
NACO is all virtual, but it's the other one does have, I think, has some in-person.
Correct. The local government program does have some in-person meetings, and I believe they're located in Stevens Point is where they hold those.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of days that are required for in-person down at Stevens Point. Okay. So we'll move on to item number 4, and that is questions for the administrator's evaluation to send to the full board for input. As you are aware, this is the second year of the term, and in our board rules, it requires that we send out a questionnaire to question and get the input from the full board membership. The one thing, and looking back at what we did last year, we had plenty of feedback from the board membership that the process that we used was probably not very helpful to them, because some of them said, I don't have any interaction with the administrator as far as the full, we used the full evaluation that was normally used by each supervisor, and as it relates to the same eval that is used by other staff. So I thought that it would be of importance, or at least the idea was to get the feedback from the executive committee as to what questions do you want to pose to the full board for their feedback, that they would have much more value or much more potential interaction with. And several that I came up with, and I'll throw it out for discussion, is, how is the administrator effectively communicating with the board? And then 2, progress on the work plan. 3, responsiveness and responses to inquiries by board members. So that was just, from a highlight, a thought, my thoughts as far as the questions, rather than providing the long, the review process that we used the prior term, where the supervisors provided feedback or didn't fill out the evaluation at all, or said in a lot of cases, I don't have any interaction or don't have any feedback for the executive committee to utilize to do the evaluation of the supervisor, of the administrator. So I throw it out for discussion. Thoughts? Supervisor Robinson?
Could you repeat the categories again?
So one was just general communications with the board. 2, progress on the work plan. And then 3, responsiveness to inquiries by board members. Supervisor Robinson, please.
I propose we had 1, leadership relative to the implementation of the strategic plan.
Okay. Other thoughts? Again, I think what I will do, we will use we will also have a self-appraisal by the administrator. The executive committee, I'm going to ask the executive committee to utilize the same evaluation sheet that we used last year, which was, a little more comprehensive. Obviously, the executive committee has much more interaction with the administrator than not necessarily the regular standing board member. So again, trying to get something that's valuable to the supervisor to allow their feedback to be able to utilize in the evaluation of the administrator. Next month, the administrator will have, as we talked about, potentially, we'll have the self-appraisal and we'll have an update on the work plan. And then we will also be taking up what priorities we want to look at as far as the work plan for 2024.
Supervisor Booth.
Go ahead.
Yeah, do you think we maybe should have something in there with basically Administrator Leonard's work with standing committees? Because, I mean, we're supposed to be doing our work at the standing committee level. So maybe something in there about how did Administrator Leonard work with your standing committee? Maybe put on there which one is your standing committee and what were your thoughts of how he interacted with your standing committee?
But is the deputy administrator in charge of some of the standing committees? The ones that the administrator supports, I have no problem with. I think it would become a little bit more challenging, although the deputy administrator came into this term. At some point, the administrator was involved in all of the standing committees. But Administrator Leonard, thoughts?
We do have a framework where primary support is somewhat split. However, quite honestly, I try to attend them all. ERC is probably the one that I don't attend every meeting, but the rest I generally try to make. And quite honestly, I appreciate that suggestion because Chris is my employee, and I view that the same way with respect to all county employees. Leadership of how we carry out the work, we do it as a team. So I think that makes great sense.
Okay. Other thoughts? One of the other things that we have tried in the past, and I don't know how successful it was, and just want to get thoughts on the executive committee, and that was looking for input from the department heads, but totally anonymous. So is there thoughts that the executive committee has that we want to try to poll the department heads of the county? Is that feedback valuable? Any thoughts, Supervisor Robinson?
I think that's a good suggestion. There's a number of programs, including a 360 review. We might want to look at, have Molly or Mike look at those as potential evaluation tools rather than recreate it.
Okay. And I think the way we would do that is we would have that request go out through Mike's office. And then if we're going to, poll the department heads and then have them be able to respond to Mike anonymously, or somehow provide an opportunity to provide the department heads the opportunity to provide that anonymously back to the Corp Council. And the same is true with the supervisors, having those come back to the Corp Council's office. Other thoughts? Anything else that the executive committee feels that would be valuable to when we do the administrator's eval? Okay. Moving on, discussion and possible action by the executive committee to forward to the county board for approval a recommended rule change to be consistent with state statute relative to ERC appointment. And Kim and Michael, I thank you for providing that resolution. I think the resolution clearly spells out and how that rule needs to be changed. Our rule needs to be changed to be consistent with state statute. There was a change in the state statutes this year. In the past, there was a requirement in state statutes that there be an FSA member on the Environmental Resources Committee, or in our case, our Environmental Resources Committee, more specifically the Land Conservation Committee. But our ERC Committee does the work of the Land Conservation Committee. And that changed. There was some contention by the federal land conservation, or the FSA office, the Farm Services Agency offices, when individuals from their local committees were serving on the land conservation committees and voting on perhaps programs. And so they wanted, so in some cases, the local offices did not want the Land Conservation Committee member also be on our ERC committee. So the state statute was changed by the legislature, and now it says that the individual must be a participant in agriculture to be on the committee. So that's what has precipitated that change, so that our board rules are consistent with state statutes. And currently we have a vacancy, and we're looking at trying to fill, and potentially we'll have a name moving forward in January to fill the January, February, March meetings for that member, because the FSA member has resigned from the ERC committee. What is your pleasure or discussion on that potential rule change? Supervisor Robinson?
I'll move that we recommend approval of the resolution to the county board.
Okay. And is there a second? Second. Motion made and seconded to approve and forward to the full board for its consideration, the rule change, so that we are consistent with state statute relative to the ERC personnel appointment. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We are down to item number educational presentation and committee discussion, none. Item number 8, next meeting and date and time, location announcements. Committee members are asked to bring ideas to future discussion. Next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 11th, 2024 at 3 o'clock. And any announcements? Okay, seeing none, we're down to item number 9, which pleasure. Motion by Vice Chair
Move to
McKeon,
adjourn.
seconded by Supervisor Dickinson to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will see you later this evening.